Well, one of the main talking points in the Nigerian elections has been the country's future prosperity, and many experts see oil as the key. Nigeria is Africa's largest economy and largest crude oil producer, but the wealth generated, an estimated $400 billion US, has tended to end up in the hands of a very small number of people. Africa's other main oil producers have also been hampered by problems that prevent economic development, from conflict to corruption. It's the subject of a new book which examines the potential of black gold to transform the continent, and I'm joined by its author, Celeste Hicks. Well, good morning, Celeste.
Hi.
Your book says that Nigeria has 20 billionaires, but nearly 70% of the population lives on less than $1 a day. That is a terrible disparity, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a story you hear across Africa and lots of the oil-producing countries, that phenomenal amounts of money are being earned through the export of oil, but the money is not trickling down to reach the population. What I've written about in the book is various theories that have been developed by academics and campaign groups over the last 10 years to try and look at how you can change that. The way that you can perhaps put money towards development projects, social development projects and economic development projects, things like infrastructure, investing in schools, health, the kinds of things that you would think if you just had that windfall of cash from oil would automatically happen. But obviously the problem comes down to how well that money is governed by the politicians.
So I would say that before you even start discussing change, you've got to work out why such a huge amount of wealth does not trickle down to the vast majority of people. Why is that happening?
Well, lots of complex processes going on. I mean, fundamentally, I believe from my research on the book that it's often a problem of governance. So the leaders who are in charge of the countries which are oil producers are not obliged to look after the population because they're earning so much money from oil that they can actually just do what they want with the money. There's a lack of democratic accountability.
Do you think they have a concept that it's not actually their money, that it's money that the country has earned? You know, in developed countries, they don't think it's their private money. But why is there this concept that they have control of that money, it's their money, and they don't need to pass it down?
I think it comes down to problems of governance. A lot of these countries are badly governed. I'm not talking about anyone in particular, but across Africa, this is some of the problems that we've seen. And it means that the people are not able to ask questions of their leaders about what they're doing with the money. So one of the things I've been looking at in the book is how to increase civil society awareness and opposition politicians and opposition parties and basically democratic opposition to ask what's happening to our oil money, what are you doing with our oil money, to basically increase people's rights and voice and ability to question
That's
the
a difficult
leaders.
thing to do, though.
It's a huge question, yeah. It's an enormous question. It's not just about oil, but oil is one of the issues that it manifests itself in.
And what have the people you've interviewed said about how you might introduce that kind of governance, that kind of structure, those rules and regulations? Where do you begin?
Well, there's very interesting debate being going on in lots of the countries that I profile in the book. So the countries that I look at are the newer oil producers, which is Ghana, Niger, Kenya and Uganda. In fact, Kenya and Uganda haven't yet actually exploited their oil, but they're in the process of setting up frameworks to stop this kind of thing happening. And the kinds of thing we're talking about are things like publishing contracts with oil companies so that the people, opposition, the media, civil society all know what the government's actually earning from the contracts with oil companies. It's things like making commitments to employ local people and develop local talents and local businesses so that local companies can get involved, and it's not just Western or in some cases Chinese oil companies coming in with their own workers and not actually having any knock-on benefit on the economy. So all of the countries that I looked at in the book are all in various stages of trying to understand how they can take some of these ideas that have been developed.
To some extent, Nigeria is more advanced. I mean, it does have proper contracts with the resource companies. But I just want to explore one point about the price of crude oil, which has been plummeting. It's been going down. What do you do to protect a country about that when its primary resource is that one thing?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and I'll break it into two parts. So first of all, when I started writing the book, which was about 2.5 years ago, everybody that I spoke to was assuming that oil and well, oil and gas, but also other natural resources, were the way that Africa was going to, or Africa as a general, as a continent, would be able to develop it economically, because the price of oil was shooting up and everybody could see so much potential. Lots of small companies were coming in and trying to look for African oil. In the last 6 months, as the oil price has crashed, I've started to hear a lot of people saying, well, actually maybe these small companies aren't going to go after that oil in Africa anymore because it's just too expensive. If they're only able to earn $50 a barrel, then why would they do that? So I think that question of the falling oil price is really important. So what a country can do to protect itself against that is for example, to put a savings fund in place. It's called stabilisation fund, which would be, if the oil price is high, as it was last year, when the good times are rolling, you put some money aside and you save for when the oil price falls, because everybody knows the oil price is notoriously volatile. So that kind of question can be managed if there's political will to put a savings fund in place.
That goes back to what you were saying
to
earlier.
the governance, yeah.
So could you, I think probably Ghana has made quite considerable progress in this area, hasn't it?
Yeah, Ghana's actually one of the countries that has put in place one of these stabilisation funds. It sounds like a really good idea, because it's like our personal finances. It's like you or I would do if we're earning more than we need, we save some for the future as just in case something happens. Like that seems common sense. But if you're in a country where there's a lot of requirements on the government to spend money immediately, a lot of development priorities, then the urge is to spend the money straight away as soon as you get it. But Ghana is actually doing really well in that respect. They have put a savings fund in place, and Ghana's also done really well in publishing the contracts, so that the civil society and media can actually know how much the government is earning.
It's about transparency.
Yeah.
I just want to ask very briefly that China goes into Africa and actually does a lot of the processing of the natural resources that are there, and it doesn't have a great track record for the environment and for human rights concerns. That's an additional problem for Africa, isn't it?
Yeah, China is a really interesting case. I think when I started writing the book, I had read a lot about this kind of overriding narrative of China being a neo-colonialist operator in Africa, that basically they were going in and doing what some Western countries had done a few years ago, and that they didn't care about human rights, they didn't care about the environment, and they were basically just exploiting, in this case, Africa's oil without any concerns. I actually found a more nuanced picture than that. I found that in some cases China were a little bit inexperienced in the way they were dealing with African oil producers. So, for example, in Chad, the Chinese oil company there caused quite a lot of environmental destruction, and the Chadian government came down on them like a ton of bricks and were really unhappy about it, and there was a huge row, and the Chinese company almost got kicked out for environmental violations. So it isn't just a question of China coming in and doing what it wants. Actually, the African countries are able to kind of counter that. But there is certainly a challenge to African oil producers who have begun to look at transparency and issues of governance, dealing with a country like China that doesn't have the tradition of kind of democratic accountability that some of the other African oil producers might be aiming to have.
Sure. Celeste Hicks, that is very, very interesting. I wish we could talk more, but we
Thanks.
can't. We're kind of out of time now. But thank you so much for joining us here